Prophecies about the United States, the continental, the 48 contiguous lower states being invaded by a foreign enemy. These prophecies go back into the 80s and from the 20-aughts. And they include Bob Jones, not the university. He was the guy from Morning Star Ministries and did some stuff with IHOP Kansas City and Mike Bickle in their earlier startup days. And also Henry Groover. Henry Groover. He did prayer walks. He died a few years ago. He's all over TV. He had some wild stories. I learned to pray the way he did, but that's another story for another day. I met him. He's just a regular, ordinary guy. I asked him. I said, "What were the 5 cities you prophesied?" He had a dream or something, or maybe he died and God showed him. I forget, but he saw 5 American cities burned, and I think they were nuked. And I said, "What were they?" He goes, "Go look it up on YouTube. It's all over the internet." Prophecy Club or something it was a TV show, I think. So that's known. A long, long, love you, long, long. Okay. And remember, here we've got this. This is my alpha male here, and he just needs some Jesse love right here. His name's Drake, and you might have seen him in some of the videos. And he just needs some love. And remember this. Yeah, I love you too. Prophecy goes back to us loving God and wanting to be with him like Drake wants to be with me right now. Okay? Right? I love you too, buddy. Right? So if prophecy is not driving you back to love Jesus more and want to spend time and hungry for more love with Jesus, then the prophecy is errant. And the people that had these dreams and experiences believe that. Okay? And they would teach that and they believe that. It's testimony about Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. That's from the book of Revelation. Okay, so I'm going to have to hold long here while we do this. And Long is his Mandarin name because he comes from Taiwan. All right. The dream that I'm just going to go through the order of events from what some of this was in general order. It's a composite. That the 5 cities Henry Groover saw were Miami, New York, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles and San Francisco. Basically, they got nuked. In his dream, he saw a bunch of ships from Russia all over the Atlantic Ocean by surprise. But no one in America's government seemed to notice or care. He saw radio signals going back and forth, and he was an engineer. Henry was at one point. And he knew that meant, what he was seeing meant that the signals between the radio signals were not communicating. America's early attack detection system wasn't going off. Our alarm system was busted somehow. Maybe EMP, maybe hack. Who knows? Trump wants a golden dome. I love the idea. It would probably work for a long time, but it wasn't working at this point anyway. In the dream. So nukes come up from somewhere and they destroy those 5 cities. All right, that was Henry Groover. Now there's other prophecy from other prophets. I won't go into who all, but from the West Coast, these underwater personnel carriers roll up out of the ocean and onto the shore. Actually, I think that was part of Henry Groover's dream. They imagine a giant tank, but it doesn't have a gun. It just carries a whole lot of soldiers, like infantry. Out of nowhere, just rolls up out of the water onto the beach. Big old door opens, soldiers run out. It wasn't floating on the surface. It was submerged. It was underwater. So it was a beach landing, an aquatic landing, but submerged. It was from underwater. It was total surprise. I believe they were Chinese. They all run up out and start invading this massive beach landing. And volcanoes start erupting all along the coast. And lava flowed down from the mountains. And the Chinese soldiers from the beach landing ran away from the lava into the Pacific Ocean here and drowned. They decided to die by drowning rather than die by being burned to death with lava, because those were their choices. Listen, if you're a Chinese soldier in China, if you decide to invade America or Taiwan, odds are you're going to die. You're going to your death, and you're not going to accomplish anything for your country. Just, and there's been others prophecy about some of that. And I think it's going to be a watery death is what it pretty much looks like. Now, if you do survive, you're going to be going back to China to preach people about Jesus, and they might kill you as a martyr there. I don't know. Maybe China will stop fighting Jesus after this. All right. So the soldiers in the beach landing. There were other missiles that came up. Mount Rainier erupted. And other volcanoes. I think in Henry Gruver's dream, God said, "Watch what I will do," or something like that. He said that more than once. He said that with the lava, and he said it with this. Several mountains erupted into volcanoes, and the ash plume disabled those nuclear missiles. I think the missiles, I don't think they were intercontinental or they weren't outer space, and it wasn't space entry. I think they were low atmosphere entry. Could have been hypersonic. I don't know. Doesn't matter. They hit those 5 cities. But for others, the mountains and the ash plume disabled the missiles somehow. And so they were nukes or they were whatevers, but they just got, disabled and just dudded, and they just kind of fell out of the sky and landed, and that was the end of it. They didn't detonate. Okay. Also, there were different types of explosions, and there was nuclear fallout and maybe biological stuff from some weapons might have been biological. Domes appeared around many cities, and Henry wouldn't say which ones, and he didn't like people saying which ones. But domes appeared around the cities, and the debris would blow around the cities. Some of that prophecy stuff also came out of Kansas City. There would be domes would appear around some cities, and the debris would flow around them. I think some cities end up, like, they don't get hit by a missile or ballistic of any kind, but fallout from the atmosphere goes to the city and destroys it that way, and may even do more damage. Okay, so God is clearly picking and choosing and protecting and destroying different cities. There are cities of destruction. Okay. So now Bob Jones said that California sunk into the ocean at the Los Angeles River. And if you look at that, that's going to be up this way somewhere, around about Santa Monica. That was what he said. And if that happens, I don't know that any place is going to be safe. But I think the Los Angeles River, I think, was the cutoff. And honestly, if that were to happen, I think it sounds kind of cruel to say, but a lot of Americans are going to say, well, don't let the door smack you where the Lord cracked you. I think a lot of musicians who move out of Los Angeles, a lot of actors who get away from Hollywood will not miss the place. So, God's, there are cities of destruction, and there are prophetic words. Get out of Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? So, this is stuff from the 80s, 90s, and 20-aughts. All right. Another part of this, the Mississippi River. There's a giant earthquake. Someone at Kansas City, some person praying, just a person, had a vision or a dream with a giant angel standing over the United States right now, still is there, holding together, going like this at the Mississippi River right now, holding it together. And it kind of, you saw this and it freaked the person out. And they tried to interpret it, and I don't think they know what it really meant. I could talk about, I'll talk about it now. The Earth is slowly getting bigger. You can go look it up. The Earth is growing. And it's not, there's no continental drift or subduction as they call it. If you make the Earth smaller and make the oceans disappear on a smaller ball, all of the continents fit together perfectly with rivers between them. It is really interesting. And the Earth is expanding. It does get bigger. And so if there's an angel holding it together at the Mississippi, that means that the land in that area is not naturally spreading out. So if that angel's been holding it and then suddenly lets go, then it pops and catches up, and that's when it splits the country. So it almost, based on that, it seems like God's had this in the works for a while. Now, I suppose the angel could gently smooth it over and God can do all things. But guys, calm, peace, love each other, relax, easy, hey, calm, okay, you got to get it. You're in his proximity. Leave him alone. Thank you. Okay. The boy just wants to be left alone. He wants his alone time. If someone's crabby, leave him alone. Don't make him be nice before you give him space. Oh no, Mama Dog is here. Flavor, go lay down. I love you, go lay down. One day Jesus will give me money and I'll have my own studio away from the dogs. But until then, we're going to do this with the dogs. Because I'm a dog herder. So, whatever it is, there's a lot going on with this Mississippi thing that involves a lot of angels, and there's always more going on than we know. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Now the Chinese, so it pops. There's an earthquake. All of from Brandon Biggs, all of the in the Kansas, Missouri, Mississippi area, something like that. Down in this area, maybe St. Louis. The houses built on cinder blocks fall down. A poured concrete foundation, they don't fall, but if it's just cinder blocks and they're cemented together, it's not strong enough to withstand the earthquake, and so the blocks fall out from under them. Okay. Now, if it's poured cinder blocks with re-rod and they're poured, you can pour into cinder blocks. That's another thing. But just cinder blocks sitting there, they would topple over. That was, I think Brandon Biggs had it saw something like that, which all makes sense. Memphis, and if you look at it, it's low, it's very low altitude. Memphis becomes a lake. The Chinese were coming across, I think they were coming across through I-70, I think is what it was. The Chinese were coming across America through I-70. Not sure how they onboarded it, but yep, they probably had a cruise caravan because some Chinese got through, and their caravan, the Chinese military caravan, was coming through, and they get to the Mississippi River to see that it's 35 miles across. And that pretty much stops the Chinese military caravan. And they realize they can't go to meet their Russian friends on the East Coast, because those Russian ships, there's a Russian invasion, and on the East Coast, the Russians are invading, some mix of communism and Islam, and Russia's involved. And the business of the federal government gets disrupted for a short time, like during the duration of this whole thing. And so the Chinese are, obviously, unless something else is going on, coming across, coordinated with the Chinese or with the Russians to meet them over here on the East Coast. There's not a whole lot over here. They've got miles and miles of miles and miles. If they were north, it'd be miles and miles of corn. You get over here, you get mountains and population and stuff. So the Chinese are coming over here to meet up with their Ruski buddies, and they get to a 35-mile wide river that they are not prepared to cross. That pretty much stops the Chinese backup that the Russians were expecting. Now, so they turn around and go back, and they leave, and they're done, and the Chinese don't bother us no more. And then it's an alliance of states come together and kick out the Russians on the East Coast, and we win. And that's it. It's somewhere about 2 to 5 years. It affects the economy. New businesses do start up. There are cities of refuge with, people leave the war zones and go to cities out in the country or whatever. So that's that. And there's revival, and a lot of the war is centered around looking for bread. It's the bread basket that they want. The bread and oil. It's petroleum oil, not like olive oil, but it's petroleum and grain. It's the wheat. They want the bread basket. They want the food. And somehow global energy crisis and global famine is what's driving all this. They want to get our food, and they want to get our oil because they don't have any. And during all this, I don't know, before, during, after, a lot of Christians get businesses and companies with a lot of money, and that helps fund the gospel. And for some reason, there's a crisis that a lot of Jews want to run back to Israel. Now, at the time of these prophecies from the 80s, 90s, and double aughts, or 20-aughts, they thought that Jews would just want to go to Israel. Now what we're seeing in Brandon Biggs, Last Days 24/7, Brandon Biggs, he said that, Jews are getting persecuted, and they already are. All over the world, a lot of places aren't safe for Jews, and that's going to increase. And so getting them to Israel, Palestine will be the only safe for the Jews. So a lot of Jews will be rushing back to Palestine. And so these Christians who have a lot of money, like the church, will help Palestine get back. And that's fulfillment of Revelation 12. The eagle's wings were given to the woman so she could flee from the dragon. Okay. So and there's probably a lot more meaning to that. Okay. Of course, prophecy always has many layers, but there's a connection. There are multiple layers of fulfillment in prophecy, and certainly, of course, I think this will be one of them. Okay. So that's generally it. There's massive revival across America, and in fact, I think it was the evil, notorious Karl Rove, the mastermind. They called him the architect behind George W. Bush's political campaign. When 9/11 hit, Karl Rove went back to study the history of American wartime during the Revolution and the Civil War. And it's loaded with revival. Revival, 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 revival. And so that became part of the architect, the notorious Karl Rove's political strategy, was to get political capital for George W. Bush based on the Christian revival, let's all go to church response. I was in Chicago during 9/11 in 2001. And my buddy and I from Taiwan actually went down to the bottom of the Sears Tower because we wanted to know what was happening there. And there was a police officer in every corner. It was mostly a ghost town. And it was very sober and calm, but alert. Later that week, I think that was a Tuesday, and it was Wednesday night, I ran out to Willow Creek in the suburbs in Schaumburg to go see, or near Schaumburg, to see what Bill Hybels had to say. And the place, Willow Creek, was packed. And it was during the week. They're not usually packed during the week, but they were a full house because they wanted to know what church had to say. And that happens. When there's war in America, people go to church. That's history. And the prophecies say that will happen here, and there will be massive revival. Okay, so and there will be a lot of young people who are not encumbered by the bad church abuse and bad theology of the previous generations. And there will be young people, and there will be stadium Christianity. Christians will fill stadiums. It'll look a lot like the Welsh revival, WELSH, Welsh revival, early 1900s. Go look it up. Like it was just massive. Like there was no crime. The pubs went out of business. The police decided to form a choir because they didn't have anything else to do. I mean, like it was, yeah, this was wild. Like one pastor, a baby was born without arms and legs. God told the pastor to drop kick the baby like a football. So the pastor drop kicks the baby, flies across the room, sprouts arms and legs, and lands in one of the pews at the back, totally unharmed. Like that, and and people get really happy and more people believe Jesus, and that kind of stuff was happening in the Welsh revival. That ain't nothing. That'll be small potatoes compared to what is prophesied to happen here. So then after that, China, I think based on other prophecy, China teams up with, let's scoot over. China teams up with Japan, maybe Korea, and they go fight Russia, and they push Russia back. They really, the Chinese probably aren't too happy with Russia after that. Because see, Russia knows that God does miracles to protect the United States. America's not perfect, but God does miracles to do it. So China and these guys, they get angry. China's no longer our enemy. They're just fed up with Russia because Russia has just been using China, something like that. They realize it. And they push Russia all the way back to France, to Paris. And so China and Japan take over all this. And if you notice, Israel is in that sweep. So they're pushing through all this. I doubt that they would only go over the north. They probably are going to go down here through the old Turkish Empire, through Constantinople and all that, Istanbul. They're going to come up from the south too. I would think. Okay, but because they're not going to want to risk something else coming up from the other side of the Black Sea. That's my speculation, though. They get to France, and then Russia signs a treaty with them, and Russia gets to be their king. That's called the surrender tactic, is what Robert Greene calls it. So Russia pulls a surrender tactic, and then the whole world unites against Israel. And that's when Jesus breaks through the sky and comes back. There's a little bit more going on there, but that's general. That's a very generic overview. All right, Taiwan hasn't been in any of those prophecies. Taiwan's had its own prophecies that there's revival there. It almost seems like Taiwan goes through a mini version of the same thing that America goes through. And literally, it's interesting that Taiwan, the name that the Portuguese gave that island is Beautiful Island. And it's the same character, beautiful, for Taiwan as it is for America. Mei. This is Mei Li Dao. Dao means island. Mei Island. And in America, it's Mei Land. It's very interesting. It's really, really interesting. Okay. So as I'm watching stuff from the modern prophets today, Ryan Cunningham is among them, although I don't really hear much from him. It's more the wealth revival. And this is the thing. I talked about latter rain theology in my most recent live stream earlier today. Latter rain theology gets easily confused with the end time outpouring of the Spirit and wealth. It's not latter rain where the prophets have to get permission from the pastor in order to prophesy. That's what latter rain is. It's not latter rain. Just because Christians have money, doesn't mean we're talking latter rain. Latter rain believes that there's just more and more and more until the government submits to, the super pastors. The fivefold minister, which is hogwash, it's fourfold. Go watch the long video and you really will get it while I dissect that. No, it's just a lot of revival and money, but in the end, there might be a rapture for the people walking in the Spirit, because New Testament talks about the restrainer being removed. So if you've got Christians that are born of the Spirit, and they're walking with the Spirit, and the Spirit's removed, the Christians will probably remove with them, because Jesus said no one knows where they came from or where they went. So the Bible does not clearly and definitely teach a rapture, but it does allow for it, and it does drop hints. But if it is there, it's not going to be everyone that just believes Jesus. It's going to be people that walk in the Spirit, born of the Spirit, living, breathing, walking. I don't mean speaking in tongues. might be a good idea, but it's about life in the Spirit, being born of the Spirit, whatever Jesus meant in John 3:6. So probably that's going to be your biggest support when the restrainers removed and those born of the Spirit like Jesus talked about. So make sure you're born of the Spirit, and make sure you're not among the goats that prophesied and cast out demons in Jesus' name, but he didn't know. Be among those that had their lamps filled with oil when the bridegroom came, because the others will be left behind. Okay, so if you are looking at these passages for a rapture of the church, it will be those that are born of the Spirit and who have their lamps full of oil. And oil is often a reference to the Spirit, so is wine. Bread is a reference to the Bible and the Word. And there are clearly churches that are all about Bible, 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 Bible. And there are churches that are all clearly very much involved in the Spirit. And if you're in a Bible, Bible, Bible church, I don't know. The truth is either one you could be left. Just make sure you got to be right with God, and don't fight with other Christians, and make sure you're obeying God if he tells you to go places, and ask him to bring clarity for this, for the matter to you. Be clear. And Jesus talked about that. Be clear. His message to the churches, let no one take your crown, in Revelation chapters 2 and 3. Revelation is singular, by the way. Revelations is not a book in the Bible. Make sure you're biblically literate. Okay, so that's that. But there is end times revival, wealth outpouring, and it's to fund the gospel, and it's not forever. There is still persecution. The Antichrist comes later. The Antichrist could be involved in what's going on over in Europe, but he's ousted from here. It's possible that there's a rapture of the church, the restrainer leaves, and then the mess in Europe is somehow able to touch what's happening here in the continental U.S. But that stuff isn't the final Antichrist move. It's the end. Now, in context of today, Ryan Cunningham is usually talking about more of the wealth angle. But again, latter rain is wealth, prosperity, and never all rainbows, but never a rainy day. That's latter rain, and that's not what I'm talking about. It's wealth in the midst of global poverty to help and spread the gospel. Fund the soup kitchens and spread the gospel, and fund the gospel. Okay. Helping Jews being threatened to be killed to get back home to Palestine where they will be safe. That could be, a way of sharing the love of Jesus. Could be an evangelism method, I guess, but it's love, just love them. Okay. But strength in the midst of the storm. Hebrews 12, 26 through 28. God shakes everything so that which falls will be removed and that which stands will remain. Okay, so it's strength in the midst of the trouble. And latter rain theology does not want to hear people talk about any trouble at all. There isn't any anywhere to be seen. It's all rainbows and no thunderstorms. That's latter rain theology. Because it's the manifested sons of God and the outpouring, and it's perfect, and there's no more tears even though Jesus isn't back yet. It's almost amillennialism. Okay, where there's just more and more sunshine until Jesus arrives. No. Jesus had his triumphal entry in Jerusalem and a great ministry, and then was beaten and killed. The church is going to follow basically the same path, although he might take some of the Christians, they might just vanish. It's possible. But whatever God has for you, okay, don't be afraid of that. But make sure you're right with it. Because if the Holy Spirit leaves, and the Holy Spirit leaves you, you're not going to be happy with that. You don't live in fear, but make sure that you're walking with the Lord. So yeah, Ryan Cunningham will talk more about wealth type of stuff for the day. It's another story. I don't want to get into that. Brandon Biggs is much more big picture in politics and local stuff. As we look at Troy Black has prophetic words, and they all, Brandon Biggs can be a little bit out there in his manners, but really, ultimately, if you listen to understand instead of listening to agree, and if you've read Jack Deere, Understanding the Beginner's Guide to Understanding Gift of Prophecy, and other stuff. Others. Troy Black has a book that he recommends for learning prophecy. If you're familiar with those, you'll see those guys are very level-headed, clear, down-to-earth prophets, like you'll see at Bethel in Redding, California with Bill Johnson. What you see today at what's the post Mike Bickle House of Prayer and before, they're teaching. It's very level-headed with prophecy. It's not abusive. And then there's some at Morning Star, I think, and then there's some at Toronto, the Airport Road Christian Fellowship at Toronto. And there's a whole lot of other ministries, but those are some large ones. And I'm somewhat familiar with how they do things, and I've known people and visited some of those places, and that's how they operate. Okay, and they are not latter rain, and they shouldn't be. It's very different. The abusive prophecy stuff is latter rain. Okay, there's a reason why the Vineyard was so worried about not wanting latter rain among them. You don't want that shite. S-H-I-T. All right, so whatever shite means. Maybe it's does shite mean anything, George? it's probably socially acceptable swearing, huh? All right. We'll leave it at that. All right. Now, Israel. Is Israel, has God forgotten his people? No, that's straight out of the Bible. Covenant theology. I have friends, a lot of it's Calvinism and Reformed theology, which is tied to amillennialism. Israel, that doesn't matter anymore. It's the church and not Israel. That's what that is. One covenant theology friend said, I don't think God's promises are about a piece of dirt. Well, I don't believe God's promises are limited to a piece of dirt, but they certainly do include it if you read the promises God gave to Abraham and Jacob and Moses and Joseph and Joshua and the gang. So God promised Abraham that his descendants would have that land for all generations to come. That doesn't sound like the church, that God's salvation comes through the church and not Israel. Israel is out of the picture and has exited the stage and left the building. Like Elvis. No. No, God promised that, and he never unpromised it. He never said, has God forgotten his people? Yup, no more land. They don't get that land anymore. And we apostles are telling all the Jews, hear the word of Jesus, move out of Palestine, don't live here anymore. That's not in the New Testament, and I'm not going to act like it's the New Testament conclusion. And you shouldn't either, frankly. Learn how to interpret your Bible, man. Learn how to know what a writing means. So, President Trump, and any American president, as Christians, if you're not Christian, do what you want. Make your own gamble. But if you're Christian, and I think that's Trump and Rubio and the gang, we as Christians believe that the Old Testament is part of the Bible. And we already know that God's promise about this piece of dirt to Abraham is part of the Old Testament. Don't touch it. You saw the Ark, the Indiana Jones, what is it, Raiders of the Lost Ark. They had a very Hollywood version of what happens if you touch the Ark or if you open it. It probably would actually be less dramatic, but much worse. If there's all that danger and drama with just touching the Ark of the Covenant, what would happen if you try to cut up the land that Ark promises? The Ark of the Covenant. What covenant? The covenant that Abraham and his descendants through Isaac and Jacob specifically, and not Ishmael or Esau, that Jacob's kids get this piece of dirt. That's what the Ark of the Covenant represents. If touching the Ark is so dangerous, what would happen if you try to chop up the land that Ark represents? Don't ever support a two-state solution. Wash your hands of it like Pilate did. Pilate was actually a patron saint in some of the early church. Like they believed that Pilate disappeared. Caesar summoned him, and on the road, Pilate vanished and never got to Rome, and Caesar died before he was supposed to get there anyway. Tiberius. Yeah. And a lot of Christian tradition has that Pontius Pilate and his wife Claudia were Christians in the early church. And who couldn't be? You see Jesus when he put, "Here is the King of the Jews" up above Jesus' head. That was Pilate's confession of faith, and it was his only way to get a message to Jesus. Realistically, if Pilate went out there himself, it'd draw too much attention and validation and all that. But putting that message up there, this is the king. Pilate believed he's King of the Jews. And he said, no, he said he would. No, I've written what I've written, because that's his confession of faith. So, wash your hands like Pilate and let someone else divide up the land, but don't sign on to it, okay? Don't be part of that. Pilate didn't hurt Jesus anyway. He had to be crucified. If Pilate had stopped that, and he couldn't stop it. The political religious institution of Pilate's day would not allow God to live in the flesh without trying to kill him, because it's run by the devil. The devil and his institutions of religion and government couldn't not kill Jesus. Pilate was just one man in a huge evil machine. And he was the cog to crush Jesus, and he believed in Jesus. That doesn't mean he was a loving, willing part of the machine, and it doesn't mean that the machine was Christian. So that was Jesus' way of evangelizing and saving the soul of Pontius Pilate. And the early church has that in its tradition. Okay, so there we go. Helping God's people get back to Israel doesn't even need to be part of some grand prophecy or Old Testament covenant. God promised the land to Israel, let them have it, the end. It doesn't mean Israel's wonderful, but the government there for the whole land, as outlined in the portioning of the land in the inheritance by Moses, that's theirs. Israel and Jews from Jacob, descendants of Jacob, should run that government. The Palestinians are not from Esau, they're from Peleg. That's explained very well. That's in the genealogies from Genesis. So they're not even descendants of Shem. I think they're descendants of Ham. I think they're somehow distantly related to Egypt. Egypt was a person. I think Abraham's grandson. Or not Abraham, excuse me. Noah, I misspeak. God promised the land to Jacob's descendants. Let them have it. They should govern it. I don't support what any government does fully. I don't endorse governments or really argue with them much. Just the government needs to be run by Jacob's descendants, the descendants of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Okay, so you can accept that, or you can decide to fight with that common sense. But either way, when the Jews are getting threatened and killed everywhere, and that piece of land that God promised to their ancestor Jacob is the only safe place for them, help them get there, and you will fulfill part of the meaning of the prophecy in Revelation chapter 12, where the eagle's wings were given to the lady so she could have refuge. Okay. So there we go with that. So when I hear Brandon Biggs give a prophecy, like if President Trump, I hear God saying, if President Trump agrees to a 2-state solution in Israel, I will split your country. If you split my land, I will split yours. That doesn't necessarily mean right away. But I think this is related. Why would God split the Mississippi? Because we split God's land for his people. It doesn't mean Israel's wonderful, but it just means God wants this guy and his children in this piece of land. That's all it means. Let them be there. You don't have to add any more to it. But you don't mess with that God. Look what he did to Egypt to get them there. Don't mess with that. If the Ark of the Covenant's that dangerous, don't split up what it represents. Stay out. And if God splits the land, then we know why. We know why. So there we go. All right. So, now that could be fulfilled many different ways. Brandon, maybe God splits the land a few years later. I don't know that it means that the Chinese and the Russians are going to invade right away. Um, there's prophecy of a couple years of hardship during Trump's time. Does that mean that those are the years when we're invaded? I don't know. But those are invasion prophecies of America. It could be that the prophecy that if Trump supports a two-state solution, it was Brandon Biggs. It's not my prophecy. It's Brandon Biggs that a hurricane will decimate Mar-a-Lago. Um, you go after my home, I'll go after yours, kind of thing. I think is what that's about. God might do that as a warning, but splitting the country would happen later. That's possible. Okay, so those are some of the things we're looking at in the prophecies that we have. If you're confused about what prophecy is, you're like, well, I'm not sure God talks to us today. I don't know if I agree with all that. All right, I don't mean to jump ahead. Go catch up on your homework and read Jack Deere, understanding the beginner's guide to understanding the gift of prophecy or something. Go down to Kansas City. Go to Redding, California. Ask them how this works. They have ways that works. There we go. Lord wanted me to go share that now today. I did. We're done. Love you all. Bye.